Live stream audio check 2323. Very good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Sam McCarthy, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee, and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Rumbold Street. This meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube page and will be available after the meeting. Please would speakers use microphones at all time and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. Introductions. Members of the committee and officers will introduce themselves, starting from my left.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch.
Councillor Kayleigh Rippingale, Newtown and Christchurch.
Councillor Sue Lissymore, Prettygate Ward.
Catherine Spindler, Saints.
Councillor Mick Spindler, Shrub End Ward.
Councillor Lee Tate for Prettygate Ward.
Councillor Jackie McLean, Markstone Lair Ward.
Faith Smalls, Councillor Fold Heath, The Hive and Rowhedge, and I'm substituting for Martin Warnes.
Irene Gimauki, Historic Buildings and Areas Officer.
Simon Grady, Planning Officer.
Daniel Bird, Planning Officer.
John Miles, Principal Planning Officer.
And Simon Cairns, Joint Head of Planning.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much, everybody. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. We will have a break at 7:30 and every 90 minutes afterwards. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. And lastly, whilst determination of a planning application is not a quasi-judicial process, unlike certain licensing functions carried out by the local authority, it is a formal administrative process involving the application of national and local policies, reference to legislation and case law, as well as rules of procedure, rights of appeal, and an expectation that people will act reasonably and fairly. All involved in these decisions should remember that the possibility that an aggrieved party may seek a judicial review and or complain to the Ombudsman on the grounds of maladministration or a breach of the authority's code. Okay, item 2 was substitutions. So tonight we have apologies from Councillor Warnes, Councillor Davison, Councillor Gocher and Councillor Arnold. And the subs, as we've heard, is Councillor Smalls, who's in for Councillor Warnes, Councillor Lissamore for Councillor Davison and Councillor Mick-Spinler in for Councillor Arnold. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Have we any? No, all good, thank you. Item 4 is urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 5 is have your say. If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items on the agenda this evening, please do so now. Okay. Item 6, no minutes have been presented to the committee for approval. So item 7, we move on to the planning applications, and I'll now read out the applications and speakers on the have your say list. Thank you. So 7.1 is 230049, land rear of AGM House, London Road, Copford. Presenting officer will be John Miles. Public against, we have Holly Ann Gathercole, and public for, we have Adam Jackson. We also have I've lent on that. We also have councillors Andrew Ellis and Kevin Bentley has a statement that will be read out. Item 7.2 is 241201, Orchard Place, Plot 3, Vernards Road in Chapel. A presenting officer is Simon Grady. We have no public against, no public for, but we do have Councillor Sunnox who wishes to speak on that. 7.3 is Moot Hall, the Town Hall. And we've got Irini Dimaruki to present that. We have no public against, no public for, and no councillors wishing to speak on that item. And then lastly, item 7.4 is 241508 Merry Hill, Colchester Road and Chapel. Presenting officer is Daniel Bird. Public against is Lena Short, and public for is Tom Green. We have no councillors speaking on that item. So, I'm going to pass that back. With that in mind, we have no speakers for application 7.3, which is Moot Hall, and that recommended decision is one of approval, subject to conditions. Does any member of the committee wish to speak on this item at all? No? That being the case, we can take this item on block. If we are minded to do that, I will look for a proposer and a seconder for that. So could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Tate and a seconder? Councillor Jackie McLean. Okay, and all those voting in favour?
That is unanimous, Chair.
Happy days, thank you. I can confirm that those items have been determined in line with the officer recommendation in the report and amendment sheet, and there will not be any further discussion on this item. Any interested parties in attendance for this item may wish to leave now. Okay, all good. All right, on to the main business. So if we start with item 7.1, which is 230049, land rear of AGM House, London Road, Copford, and I'll invite John Miles to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'll just get the presentation up. So item 7.1, land rear of AGM house. The proposal concerns new office buildings totalling around 4,000 square metres, updates as per the amendment sheet. This is the location plan. For background, the application is a returning application. The application was previously considered by members at the meeting on the 25th of July. This is the originally proposed site layout plan, which was considered at the previous committee. Following deliberations at that meeting, the application was deferred owing to concerns primarily around possible impacts on neighbouring amenity and with a view to look at layout changes, including moving the massive development closer to the centre of the site. Following the planning committee meeting on the 25th of July, the applicant has submitted revised plans. This includes a reduction in the length of block 1, which is the block to the north-west top left, and the reductions in the length of block 1 and slight reorientation moves this building further from neighbouring properties. Block 3, which is the south-west bottom left, has also been moved east closer to the centre of the site and further from neighbouring properties. And I'll go through the site photos for the benefit of members who are not at the previous meeting. This is a view of the access onto London Road. It's an existing established access which also serves other commercial buildings which are to the north of the application site. This is a view looking east along London Road and west along London Road, so good visibility displays in both directions. This is a view into the access, seeing the surrounding existing commercial buildings, a view up the access back to London Road, view of one of the commercial buildings and parking. This is a view to the northwest of the site, one of the existing commercial buildings seen there, a wider view across the site. A further view across the north of the site. This is the northeast of the site, again a further commercial building already in place there. And this is a view across the site. As members will note, there's existing quite established vegetation to a majority of the boundaries. It's a view towards what is the southeast corner. This is a view looking across the southern boundary west. You can just about make out in the distance the neighbouring properties. This is a slightly closer view. So where you can see the vegetation sort of centre is approximately where the boundary is. So this is giving a view across a majority of the site. Now this is over towards the west, beyond the west of the site. So these are the nearest neighbouring properties, which are located on Ford Mews, which is a relatively recent development, primarily bungalows, but there are a couple of two-storey buildings there as well, as can be seen on the screen here. This is the further view. This is an aerial image for further context. The site is the larger of the red squares, and then you have the recent, or the relatively recent residential development, which is the nearest neighbours to the east. You have existing commercial established buildings and uses to the north. This is an image of the site layout plan, so just in large scale to make it a bit clearer and easier for members to see. So the changes are shown by the red hashed boxes. So it includes, as I say, moving block 1 and block 3 east further from neighbouring properties. So the changes have not fundamentally altered the spatial arrangements of the site, but notwithstanding that the previous site arrangement was considered acceptable to offices in neighbouring amenity terms, the amendments proposed are considered to improve the relationship between built form and the nearest neighbouring properties, specifically those to the west. Block type A plan, block type A elevations, block type B plan, and block type B elevations. So in terms of the changes that have been made, block 1 to the north has been reduced in length by, and subsequently is now 7 to 8 metres further into the site and the same additional distance from the nearest residential neighbours, and there's now a minimum separation between the proposed buildings and neighbours of around 25 metres. In some case, there is a greater distance. So as before, the buildings themselves adopt a contemporary approach, including a flat roof, projecting perforated metal shrouding, and the fenestration and detailing proposed is considered to break down the visual massing and provide some visual interest, and overall the character and appearance of the buildings are considered respectfully scaled and articulated, and the Council's Urban Design Officer has raised no objections in these regards. And here are some of the site elevations which show a bit more context. The top image, you can see what is the existing commercial buildings in the background, which are to the north, so it is within that context. It must also be considered and noted that the current proposals are part of a longer planning history for this site. So over the last 12 years, there have been 3 previous applications for commercial development on the site, all of which have been approved. This is the most recent application, approved in 2020, which granted consent for just over 3,000 square metres of office space. And it's understood that this permission has been implemented and does remain extant, so it's capable of being built out. For comparison, here are the previously approved site plan shown left and the proposed site plan, which is shown on the right. As you can see, the approved scheme included 3 buildings facing west, south and east, while comparatively the current scheme looks to move the buildings further towards the peripheries of the site and orientate that massing differently with respect to neighbours. Here are the previously approved elevations for the previous applications, which show the approved buildings which are of a comparable scale and massing to the proposal, albeit with a slightly different design approach. If we go back further, looking at a further application, 131471 was approved towards the end of 2013. While it's not been confirmed whether this permission was ever implemented or it remains extant, it does form a material planning consideration. This scheme concerned a new building to the west of the site and an extension of the existing commercial building to the north to form a larger commercial building there. It's important to note that this scheme, approved in 2013, the western building was only around 8 to 9 metres from the boundary, while the buildings that were approved were themselves not of dissimilar scale to the proposed buildings under this application, with the approved buildings having a height of around 7.2 metres. The same is also true for an earlier 2012 consent, which again shows 2 buildings, one relatively close to that westerly boundary. So at the time of the application for residential development to the west of the site, so that's those nearest neighbours which I showed pictures of earlier, the 2012 and 2013 consents had already been approved and were at that time extant. So the dwellings to the west were approved in that context, and shown on the screen is an extract from the 2014 application for the properties on Ford Views, which shows it was sort of the relationship between those buildings was considered at that time, and shows that the dwellings were approved in a context and with an awareness that there was consent for commercial buildings to the east. It's also important to note that the consented buildings here had approved uses of what was then class B1, B2 and or B8, so that's a mix of office but also general industrial and storage and distribution, whereas this current application just seeks consent for offices. And again, just looking at Ford Views to get a better appreciation of the context and the history. As I said earlier, the properties along the boundary nearest to the proposed site are bungalows, but there are also 2-storey dwellings in that development, including plot 1 and plot 2. So this is an image of, as I showed earlier, one of the bungalows and the 2-storey properties that are there. And for some further context, this shows a scaled elevation from the approved plans of the as-built dwelling, plot 2, and the flank of one of the proposed blocks. So members will note that while the massing of the buildings is appreciated to be different, the scale of the office buildings proposed are considered comparable to that of the domestic scale of the 2-storey dwelling, which is currently on Ford Mews. This is a proposed visualisation from in the site, moving back to the proposal. And we've also now have updated sunlight daylight modelling and also additional visualisations to help with an appreciation of the context. This is one of the sunlight models. Modelling's been undertaken at different times of year and different times of day. So this is spring, to the right of the screen is east, and to the left of the screen is west. The sun will be moving right to left, sort of across the bottom. This is for summer. Summer. And autumn, and finally winter. And due to the path of the sun and position of scale of the buildings relative to neighbouring residential dwellings, no materially harmful loss of light or overshadowing of neighbouring properties is expected. And this includes in terms of private amenity space, internal living spaces, or any solar panels. Visualisations have also been provided to help consider possible impacts on neighbouring amenities and give a general idea of the relationship with neighbours. In terms of landscape features, please note that it's proposed for there to be a mix of retaining the existing boundary planting and gapping up, and new planting will be used with exact details proposed to be controlled by condition. Members will note up on the top left, it shows which property these visualisations are taken from the perspective of. So this is the property to the southwest. The green box, if you can make it out, shows the outline of one of the office buildings approved under the most recent consent. The blue line shows where the building was previously proposed, and then where the block shown is where it's now currently proposed. So in respect of this property, in the midpoint of the rear of this property, the distance previously proposed, the separation was 26 metres, it's now 31 metres, and the visualisations are shown there. This is from the property further north. Again, as I touched upon earlier, while the blocks are slightly nearer, they are orientated differently. So while the previous approval approved the massing effectively facing the neighbours, the different orientation in the peripheral position means that it's the flanks of the building that will be visible rather than the main mass. In this case, the separation distance is 30 metres from block 1, 33 from block 3. And these are the other two neighbouring properties. And the final one. And it's worth noting that the building which is most visible in these visualisations is one of the existing commercial buildings to the north of the site. So that doesn't form part of the proposal. That's one of the existing buildings and forms part of the existing context there. And I'll just end on the proposed site layout. So to summarise, the amendments before members are considered to improve the relationship between built form and the nearest neighbouring properties, and the proposal is not anticipated to result in material harm to neighbouring amenity. In light of this, and with the proposal considered acceptable with regard to other material planning considerations, for the reasons outlined in the committee report, and taking into account the anticipated economic and social benefits of the proposal, the recommendation before members is one of approval as set out in the committee report. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions after this evening's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Right, we'll move on to the speakers now. So I will start by inviting Holly Ann Gathercole to speak in objection of the application. Holly, you have 3 minutes. A bell will go after 2 minutes to let you know that you have a minute remaining.
It is accepted that some concessions have been made on behalf of the applicant. However, it is considered that those concessions do not go far enough to satisfy the committee and the amendments it sought on the previous occasion. There have been no material changes to the application. The application was deferred to allow parking around the outside in order to prevent overshadowing of the residents, the committee being concerned about the overbearing impact. This has not changed. It is still overbearing and remains as it was pre-deferral, save for the buildings being moved slightly. However, these are not centred as recommended. Visual plans have been prepared to show the view from the residents' premises. These images are almost identical both pre and post-deferral. One has to question their accuracy. It has been confirmed that mature greenery will be placed at some 3.5 to 4 metres in height against the 9-metre building. Upon anybody's maths, the buildings will still clearly be visible, and this is not reflected within the images. It clearly does not provide good screening as suggested, and nor does it promote privacy. That's hardly surprising when the plans cannot even identify the properties correctly. And what is further questionable is the daylight report. I do not need evidence to show you that autumn and winter months are not the same, and it's certainly not the residents' experience of what you can see on the screen. If this is all incorrect, what else is incorrect? I addressed the committee on need on the previous occasion, and I maintain that this has still not been satisfied. I remind the committee of the Neighbourhood Plan Objective 6, which stipulates that the application ought to encourage local employment proportionate in scale to the village and further enable local job opportunities and provide services for local residents and visitors. The application before you today is contrary to this objective and is most certainly not proportionate to the rural village of Copford. The demographics of the village can be identified from the average house price. Unemployment is low, around 2%, with the majority of residents being either retired, professionals or care providers for family members. The employment is not for the benefit of Copford, but for those outside the area which will be required to travel. That leads me on to the increased traffic on London Road, together with the lack of parking on the proposal. It is suggested that the use of Colchester Car Club will negate this. However, this type of company is typically used in cities such as Manchester and Birmingham. How will it actually reduce cars? In summary, the committee ought not to be satisfied there's been compliance with the deferral. The plans are not in keeping with the village and are in direct contravention with the neighbourhood plan objectives 2 and 6 as previously set out.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, next up, I'll invite Adam Jackson to speak in support of the application. I believe he's online via Zoom.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Adam. Yep, we can hear you perfectly. Adam, you have 3 minutes. A bell here will go after 2 minutes to let you know you have a minute remaining.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Adam Jackson and I represent the applicant. Members may recall that the application was deferred by committee in July for the joint head of planning to seek amendments to the parking layout and to the mass of the development, which was to be moved closer to the centre of the site. The sole reason for this was to improve the impact of the scheme on the neighbouring bungalows in Ford Mews. Members are reminded that the council's professional officers had recommended approval for the original layout, which they had assessed to have no detrimental impact on neighbour amenity. However, members sought some further improvement and the applicant has obliged and has moved the buildings a further minimum of 5 and maximum of 8 metres from the neighbouring bungalows. Members will be able to appreciate these changes on the plans presented, and I would ask that some consideration is given to the pink coloured fans that illustrate the outlook from the bungalows. In the case of 6 Ford Mews, this property looks away from the site and the car park adjacent is not part of this development as it exists. In the case of numbers 4 and 5 Ford Mews, their outlook is over the middle of the site where there are no buildings. The impact on these dwellings is improved over the approved scheme, a consent that remains live. Number 3 Ford Mews looks south away from the development. The impact on this property was minimal previously, and the nearest proposed building is now a further 5 metres away. It may have been the case that when the scheme was discussed at July committee, the outlook and distances involved were not fully appreciated. Hopefully these revised plans assist in better illustrating the context. Officers previously found no amenity harm and no conflict with your adopted planning policies in respect to this proposal, and as such, the recommended approval. That remains the same this evening, and it is evident from the revised proposals that any negative impact on neighbouring property has been totally removed. I trust this explanation has been helpful, and I hope that members can see that the applicant has taken all reasonable steps to improve the situation and that the scheme can now be approved. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adam.
Thanks.
Okay. Next, we'll have Robert Carmichael on my right here to read out statements from Councillor Ellis and Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. So, statement from Councillors Ellis and Bentley reads as follows. Chairman and committee members, unfortunately, Councillor Bentley and I are unavoidably committed elsewhere this evening, so please accept this statement on behalf of both of us and do not interpret our not being here in any way as agreement with the amended application. We remain convinced that Cockford will be adversely impacted by this development. One of the reasons for calling in this application a year or so ago, was because of the overbearing impact the development, and in particular blocks 1 and 3, would have on Ford Mews. Whilst we appreciate that following the 25th of July committee meeting, the applicant has moved these blocks further away and slightly re-articulated them contrary to the planning officer's view. We do not believe that this is a better solution to overcoming the harm to neighbour amenity than refusing the scheme and allowing the extant permission to be developed. We continue to believe that the access/egress is insufficient for the number of vehicles and continue to be disappointed that Essex Highways do not share our concerns. People that actually live there can attest to just how appalling the London Road has become, tipping yet more traffic onto it given the number of permissions along it, many as yet unbuilt, but all of which will also be tipping all their traffic onto it, is simply lunacy. Paragraph 89 of the NPPF tells you a development should not have an unacceptable impact on local roads. Taken cumulatively, you have to see that this constant stream of permissions is doing just that to the London Road through Copford and Stanway. The report presented to you this evening deals with the local plan policies DM6, DM15, SG5 and SG6 together with the NPPF paragraphs 85, 89, 91, 92 and 94, all of which have been interpreted by the planning officer to weigh in favour of this development, although he accepts in his summary at paragraph 16.16 that some judgment is required when looking at the evidential justification provided. We still contend, as we did on the 25th of July, that policy could so be easily interpreted as we do to weigh against. Please take the time this evening to fully interrogate these paragraphs and the conclusions drawn. The local plan and NPPF are indeed supportive of local rural business. We are, after all, trying to enable sustainable rural communities. The key here is that they are designed to support local rural businesses, enabling them to remain and grow within the community in which they began, providing employment for local people, helping to sustain the village in which they exist. Indeed, Objective 6 of the Copford with Easthorpe Neighbourhood Plan accepts that it should encourage local employment proportionate in scale with the villages. Please acknowledge that this scheme does not accord with that statement. The sheer volume of parking provision proves that this isn't an expanding local rural business for local people. This is the wholesale import of business into a village location, and as such is not supported by the parish council nor the neighbourhood plan, and in design terms is totally out of keeping and dwarfs the adjacent residential houses and bungalows. Turning to the scheme design, the neighbourhood plan states that it expects the scale of growth and location of new buildings is proportionate to the size of the village and designed to retain the sense of space and community well-being in the villages. And in policy CE3 expects high standards of design and character respecting the character of the parish. Colchester's local plan policies SP7 and DM15 talk in respect of responding positively to local character, enhancing the quality of existing places and their environs, respecting and enhancing the site's context and its surroundings. Just look at this scheme and ask yourselves honestly, does this development, with its over 8 metre tall, in the officer's words, crisp contemporary, in our words, out of keeping and overbearing buildings, which officers have told you sit in a site designed as open countryside, do that. And then there's the hours of working. The residents in bungalows adjacent to blocks 1 and 3 are retired. They purchased homes in which to enjoy their retirement, and importantly, they are already there. 7 a.m. is far too early to be arriving and disturbing people, so we would ask the committee to consider 8 a.m. the earliest people could arrive should you see fit to give the revised scheme a permission this evening. We sincerely hope, however, that you will agree with us and refuse this application because it is not policy compliant with Copford with Easthorpe Neighbourhood Plan, nor with the local plan, nor NPPF when interpreted correctly regarding support for rural businesses, not the expansion or introduction of new business from elsewhere. Best wishes, Councillors Ellis and Bentley. Thank you, Chair.
Fantastic. That was from both councillors, is that correct? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to hand that back to John. John, there's quite a lot there. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Chair. I will go in a reverse order. I'll try and respond to Councillor Ellis's and Bentley's points first. So I will respond to the points raised on highway impacts and proportionality. I would just caveat that with matters of need and highways were discussed at some length at the last committee, and the application was deferred specifically on matters of layout and neighbouring amenity. That being said, if we start at the Copford with Easthorpe neighbourhood plan, as outlined in the committee report, that has been carefully considered. Objective 6, economy, has been mentioned a couple of times. I think it's been largely read out, but it's to encourage local employment proportionate in scale to villages. But it also, there is a second bullet point to enable local job opportunities and provide services for local residents and visitors. So the proposal has the clear potential, in officer's opinion, to enable local job opportunities, fulfilling the objective in that regard. The exact figure in terms of employment isn't known, isn't put forward, but using a standard of approximately 1 job per 20 square metres, which seems to be what's often reasonably adopted, that would equate to around 200 job opportunities from this development. In terms of questions of proportionality, it's ultimately a matter of planning judgment. Officers would suggest that if the scheme is disproportionate, we would expect to see some form of identifiable harm to indicate that disproportionality. And in this case, officers don't consider that there is identifiable harm in the specific circumstances of the case. And we also have the consideration of the extant scheme, which is an important material planning consideration. Highways was also touched upon, including highway capacity. We have a transporter statement, which the Highway Authority have considered and have raised no objection. And as members will be aware, the NPPF sets a high bar in highways capacity terms, so that the proposal should only be refused if the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. And I would suggest this is something that we would need robust evidence on. If that were to be a sustainable reason for refusal, officers do not consider that would be a sustainable reason. The parking does not exceed the maximum standards, and the scheme would also make provision for EV charging, cycle parking, and also improvement works to the local bus stop. Also as well, a contribution to Colchester Car Club, and the scheme is just under a mile from the station, so there are good transport links in that regard as well. And as I said, the scheme must also be viewed in the context of benefits, so there will be, it's anticipated local and wider benefits, so as I said, employment, business rates, but also an anticipated increase of spend in the local economy. I don't contend it will only be for Cotford residents, and it would only be Cotford residents working there, but I would suggest that that isn't something that should be used or could be seen to weigh against the scheme. Equally, it's likely the case that residents of Cotford don't always work in Cotford. There will be some travel there, and I think it's about how that movement is managed. In this case, officers are satisfied there won't be material harm to highway capacity. There's provisions in place for sustainable transport options. In terms of the height of the buildings, a predominant height is around 7.2 metres. There is some variation due to changes in ground levels. It's also considered important to know that officers are of the view just because a building may be partially visible, that doesn't then necessarily equate to harm. As outlined, there is a significant separation between proposed built form and existing built form. And there's also the consideration of perspective. So it probably wouldn't be desirable to have a 7 or 8 metre tree right on the boundary, because that itself would cause overshadowing. But if you are close to a 2 or a 3 metre tree, perspective-wise, that can probably do quite a good job at blocking something that's 25, 30 metres away. So officers are satisfied that there will be a good level of screening there. And I think the last point was just in terms of countryside, rural business, supporting the rural economy. As outlined in the officer's report, due regard has been given to the policies of the NPPF, including in terms of rural employment. Paragraph 85 is particularly relevant though, which confirms policies and decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt. Significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, so that's regardless of location, taking into account both local business need and wider opportunities for development. So officers consider that there is national policy support subject to the usual caveats. Hopefully that covers everything, but happy to come back. Thank you.
I think so. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're going to open it up to the committee now. Pardon? Sorry, Councillor McLean's going first. So, Councillor Jackie McLean, as ward member, and you did indicate first. If you'd like to start, that'd be brilliant.
Thank you. I think we need to be very careful that we protect the local village people. I understand we need growth, and I understand you're thinking of local people, but you cannot guarantee that at all for the local people. They have a chance to go there, yes, but you can't guarantee it. I think we need to be mindful that there is screening, and we do protect that little cul-de-sac of development. It's only fair to them. I mean, they've lived there for so long and they've been used to it. I know you never know what's around the corner when you don't own the piece of land. I can fully understand that. But we still have to protect people's protection on, their local environment. It's, Cotford's a very rural area, and I think we need to really respect that and, support the local people, because, they've lived there for so long now and it's always been acceptable. I don't think everybody will be getting a bus or some, the public transport there because it's not the best of routes for Copford, I'm afraid. So I think you'll guarantee it will be car dependent wherever we are in Copford. If you could make it different, that would be ideal, but I can't guarantee it. But I think if we can shield that cul-de-sac with screening, which is already there, but which we can protect on the hedgerow, and then make it so it's acceptable and there will be no noise, and if we can move the start time back to 8 o'clock, I think that would be acceptable, because most places in Copford start at 8 a.m. and I think that's going to be a good time for local residents. It's 7 a.m. I think is very early, and with some of these jobs, it does, that particular development can make some noise sometimes. So I would be a lot happier if we could put that in the submission and actually make that acceptable for the local resident.
Thank you very much indeed. John, I don't think there's any questions there. It was more of a kick-start to the conversation we're going to have. But in terms of the moving the arrival time back to 8, is that something we could condition?
Thank you. Yes, so there is, as we say, currently a condition. Hours of operation, weekdays 7 till 7, Saturdays 8 till 5, Sundays and public holidays, no operation. If members did feel very strongly that there was a need for a change, then we can look at that.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, on to Councillor Lissamore, please.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I wondered if you could just clarify, please, the parking arrangements, because the old applications that we saw up on there did seem to have far more spaces than this application, and it is a concern. And we all know about enforcement. We all know how stretched the planning department are, and if people start parking in the turning bay or even on the main road or in other areas that causes a nuisance, we know how stretched planning are to enforce that. So if you could just clarify for me, please, the parking spaces that are being offered at the moment. I understand, from the paperwork here that it is absolutely office use, that there are no workshops, there is nothing that could create any noise. And I agree with the start. I see, there are some conditions in the paper which say 8 o'clock, and I would certainly support an 8 a.m. start rather than a 7 a.m. But one thing that's just came to mind, a week ago, there was the recent fire at Copford Place, further down the road, on the opposite side of the road. And one thing I read in the press that the fire brigade had said was that they had a problem dealing with the fire because of a shortage of water. Now, I'm just raising that. I know that's not obviously necessarily a planning condition, but, and I see that there are no concerns from the fire brigade about the site, but is that something that we need to be concerned about? Is that something we need to investigate because the fire only happened a week ago? And it's obviously worrying that there might be a shortage of water, and whether that was a hydrant shortage or an actual flow of water or pressure of water, I don't know. But I just wondered if there was something just came to mind when I was thinking of this application. So, thank you.
Over to you, John.
Thank you. Yep, so there's a total, in terms of parking spaces, 141 car parking spaces proposed. That's 119, 8 disabled parking, and then 14 retained spaces to the north. There's also 60 secure cycle parking spaces and 8 spaces for powered two-wheelers. So officers consider that we know that in an ideal world, everyone would be getting the bus, getting the train, but we know realistically that some people will be driving, and officers consider that there is suitable provision for vehicle parking, but also supporting that move to more sustainable transport measures. It's also important to note that the parking standards for officers is a maximum. So my understanding is that we're quite close to that maximum. So actually to provide more parking in this case may present policy conflict. And as you say, there is a condition limiting the use of the building specifically to office use, something that's EGI off the top of my head. So it wouldn't permit for things like even light industrial, heavy industrial, storage and distribution. It's purely an office use, and that condition is imposed mindful of the local context and the proximity to residents. As has been said, the fire service have raised no objection. General fire safety matters would normally be covered by building regulations. I can't profess to know the details of what the issues were with the recent fire, whether that was practically access or flow. I'm not sure, Simon may know more, but I think it is quite early stages. I'm sure that will be carefully investigated, but I don't consider there's any evidence or reason that would prevent us from making a decision on the application tonight or raise wider concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Excellent. Councillor Rippingale, please.
So my concerns still remain around the design, actually, of the buildings. They aren't in keeping with the local area. I know there are some industrial units there, but if you look at the housing that surrounds the area along the London Road, is primarily Victorian. It sort of brings me back to the discussions we were having about the Abro site and appropriate design for the area. Those really sleek buildings, though, would look nice in Tollgate. I'm not sure they work in the context of the surrounding houses. So I would be challenging it on DM15. It may be an acceptable design, but is it acceptable given what is around it? That's my concern. I don't feel like the buildings are in keeping.
John, after you.
I appreciate, as always, design is subjective, and it's always a difficult one to sort of put a finger on where the design is in terms of quality. We have consulted, as part of the process, the council's urban design officer, who's the full comments are included in the report. And while design is subjective, the urban design officer is satisfied that within the context those buildings will appear appropriately grounded and appropriately designed. I appreciate it's a different architectural approach to the properties further to the north, but I would suggest, in my view, it will be viewed a lot more in the context of those existing commercial buildings, and it is anticipated that, particularly over time, as additional planting goes in and establishes, the site will be quite well contained visually. The sort of the use of the rain screen cladding, I appreciate that's a sort of slightly different architectural language, but that does also have benefits in terms of solar gain from an environmental perspective, and also is anticipated to further reduce light pollution. So I think there are merits to the scheme and the design, and officers do consider that it will bed itself successfully in the context. And there are also conditions recommended covering further details on things like materials and the precise architectural detailing. So we appreciate it needs to be nicely executed if it's going to work. So we're very mindful of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rippingale? All good. So Catherine Spindler.
Just very quickly, on the last time it came to planning, I mentioned about security, whether those gates closed at night, and you said you'd look into it. I was trying to whisk through to see if I found about that. I couldn't see anything.
John.
Thank you. Yes, my apologies. I think that was an oversight, that wasn't picked up on specifically, but my understanding is that they would look to have a gated access to the site. We could, however, either informatise, we would strongly recommend that, or if that's something that members feel very strongly about, we could potentially look at a condition. But I would anticipate that the landowner would be just as mindful of the potential for antisocial behaviour, and we would be mindful of that. So, happy to take further instruction on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smalls.
Yes, I'm just curious. I don't know if it was in how long Ford Mews has existed, around when it was built and people moved in the context of the first planning permission, I think, on this report is 2012. So I appreciate since 2012, obviously, designs have changed, but it seems that it might have been reasonable for some time now for people living in that area to anticipate at some point there may be some offices or similar there.
Thank you. Yes, as I said, it's a site with a long history, and that history does predate the permissions for the residential development to the west. So while that's certainly not to say that we don't need to respond to and respect their amenity, officers consider we do. It is a material consideration that the site has a long history which predates that residential development. So the permissions go back as early as 2012 when those buildings were approved, one of which is actually nearest the boundary than the scheme we're considering, and also included the general industrial use, which we would expect would likely be a worse neighbour than an office use. So we had the 2012 permission for a mix of commercial uses, a 2013 permission, and it was in 2014 that the application for the residential development was submitted. And as I showed in the extract from actually the person who submitted the application showed that we are aware of this is the context, and yeah, those permissions would have remained live for a good time after that consent. So certainly a material planning consideration, and yeah, officers do consider there's a reasonable expectation that the site will and would be developed at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm good. Yeah, Councillor Tate, please.
Yeah, we've talked about, obviously bearing in mind the rural location and the adjoining bungalows, so predominantly retirement residents. We've talked about amending the opening time, so to speak, but I wondered if we could also look at the closing time. I think hours of 8 till 6 would be more appropriate. And secondly, rather than informative, not that I had a misspent youth, but I think a big clear space, parking space where there's not much else to do in Copford. I can well imagine boy racers would love a bit of that car park. So I think rather than informative, I would prefer that it was, essential that it had a locked gate at night.
Thank you, Councillor Tate. Was there any questions there, or was it more comments? It wasn't, was that? No, your opinions. Okay, perfect. Who have we got next? Councillor Mick-Spindler, please.
Thank you. Just a quick question. A mile from Colchester Station. I mean, I've made that journey many a time. And is that how the crow flies, or is by the road?
So that was a mile from Marks Tay Station. So that's the walking route. So that's not as the crow flies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marks Tay. I think that's it for the speakers. Is there anybody else that wishes to go again before we look for some form of proposal? Okay. Any further comments from you, John or Simon? Anybody?
No, I think only to bring out the point that John raised with regard to the alternative previously approved use on the site for general industrial, which would have a far worse impact as a fallback position on the residents than the office use now proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jack McLean.
Could we just have recommendations of what we're putting forward and everybody's comments and what we will be passing, so that we all fully understand, please, that we get it right?
Certainly. Sorry, Robert? Yeah, we haven't had a proposal yet, so if we take a proposal of some form, we'd look to then include the conditions that we've spoken about this evening, but I am seeking a proposer at this point. Councillor Sam McLean, seconder? Okay, I'll second it. So if we can go to a vote. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yeah. Ignoring what you've just said, I apologise. Okay, so if we're proposing, are you happy to include the conditions of changing the arrivals from 7 till 8? And then I'd also look at the closing or wrapping things up at 6 rather than any later than that. And also the locked gate and access. Councillor McLean, was there anything else? Okay, you happy with that?
Sure.
Okay, excellent. Simon, any views?
Yeah, I mean, 6 p.m. closing for an office does seem awfully early in a modern working environment, given that, we are only talking about offices here, we're not talking about industrial use. I would suggest 7 p.m. isn't very late.
If I could just add on from Simon as well, I think we would expect a majority of people will probably leave the site at 5. So you may, even if you do movements up to 7, it's going to be your people working late and your occasional movements. Yeah.
Councillor McLean.
I think we also have to be respectful for the residents of the area, slamming doors and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, we're putting something in a rural area, and if they're office workers, it should be fairly quiet anyway. But I think, you know, could we just work with the residents that, you know, 6 or 6:30. I mean, you need a life as well, don't we? So, you know, I just think, you know, we should. I'd stretch to 6:30, but no later. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in office blocks. I'm sure we all have, and I'm quite sympathetic. There's been many an occasion where I've had to work late, and you know, 6 o'clock is not doable, and 7 o'clock makes much more sense. And let's be honest, sometimes you're the last person in there. I'm going to be difficult and say that I think 7 o'clock is probably fair, but I mean, is there any way that we could perhaps suggest that it would be ideal if people were to leave earlier? Councillor Smalls, I saw your hand.
It's just to say I support 7 p.m. I mean, in the modern working environment, and there should be acoustic screening in place. And you're talking about day-to-day noise, aren't you, of a possible door or something? And like I say, the residents would have had some awareness there was a possibility of the site being developed. And we're not expecting somebody leaving an office at 7 p.m. to be particularly noisy. And if there was, that would be dealt with by noise enforcement. So just to reinforce, I support 7 p.m. because we want to encourage business.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think, you know, ultimately people are coming home from their days of work or whatever they may be at that time anyway. So there's going to be door slams and cars pulling up and all sorts anyway. So yeah, I'm mindful to stick with 7. Sorry, John.
Sorry, if I may
rambling.
quickly, Chair. No. As I said, the 2019 permission remains extant, so I have looked actually at the conditions that were imposed on that consent, because that's clearly a very strong material planning consideration. Condition 19, conditions that the use shall not be be open outside the following times: weekdays 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Saturdays 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. So I would think that would also make a case for longer opening hours, as I say, that permission remains capable of being implemented. Thank you.
We are, yeah, definitely. Okay, you're happy, proposer? Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, so that all members are aware before we go to the vote, the extra conditions that we have, or the change to the first condition would be that operating hours on site would be from weekdays would be from 8 a.m. till 7 p.m. and that the other condition would be regarding that a gate for security purposes be installed to stop antisocial behaviour. I can't think of the word, I'm afraid, but I'm sure that deter antisocial behaviour. But Chair, and if you propose and Secretary are happy with that, then we. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lismore.
Councillor Lismore.
Sorry, can I just clarify the gate? That the gate will be shut. Yeah, lockable. You know, not that there's just a gate.
A lockable gate, I think that's, yeah. That's.
Sorry, can we stipulate that it will be locked? Not that it's a lockable gate, but that it actually will be locked.
Robert, can we ensure that, please?
I've got that noted down. I'm sure that Simon,
Brilliant.
in his conditions, will as well.
No, that's absolutely right. Get that worded correctly. Okay, I'm looking to take the vote now. So all those in favour of the proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8.
All those against?
1.
I think that covers everybody. No abstentions. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That concludes that particular item. Where are we? At 5 to 7, so we'll move swiftly on. Thank you to those who visited, councillors and speakers. So we'll move to 7.2, which is 241201 Orchard Place, Plot 3, Vernon's Road in Chapel. And I'll invite Simon Grady to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen. So, Item 7.2 is a full planning application for the addition of 3 static caravans onto one of the existing 3 plots at the Orchard Place Travellers site in Chapel. The application is being considered by committee because it's being called in by Councillor Sunnox, and the reasons for the call in are set out in paragraph 1 of the report before you. I'll take you through some slides. So this is the location plan, site edged in red, and you'll see on the left-hand side is the A124 that goes into 8 Ash Green and into Stanway. This is the site plan as existing. So you'll see the site is split into 3 plots. Plot 3 is the one on the left, the one that's shaded in grey. That's the one where the proposed additional caravans are going to be located. This is the site layout plan as proposed. You can see 3 caravans. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the western boundary there's 1, and then 2 on the southern boundary. You'll see that the 3 new additional caravans are the same size as the existing one that's also on the southern boundary. You'll also see the kind of peachy coloured blocks are for the parking. This is the proposed elevation drawings of the 3 proposed new caravans, which are the same as one of the ones that's already on plot 3. Some site photos. So this is looking west with the larger caravan straight ahead and the other caravan on the left. The space in between those, where that touring caravan is where 2 of the caravans are going to go. And this is a photo of the western boundary showing, behind the larger caravan, showing where the 3rd proposed caravan would be located. This is looking back to the entrance, kind of east northeast, showing where the parking would go. And that pink structure there is part of the play area, which is being retained on the site. And then finally, this is the entrance into Chapel Place site, showing visibility and good access into and off of the site. So first I just want to confirm the amendment to the published report, which was circulated yesterday. So Essex Fire and Rescue Service do not object to the application, and Building Control have confirmed that building regulations do not cover caravans. So now that we've received these responses, the proposed layout of the site is now fully supported and is not considered overdevelopment of the site. The reasons are for this, as set out in the report. There are no specific standards in terms of traveller site layout or density. The layout has been proposed by the current occupiers, so is acceptable to them in terms of their own living standards. The proposal has no impact on the appearance of the area. It does not conflict with any other relevant guidelines or regulations, including fire safety, and it also allows for adequate parking and turning on the site and retention of that play area. In terms of highway safety, it's considered that the additional traffic generated by 3 caravans would not have a significantly material impact on the local highway network, and the Highway Authority raised no concerns. So there are no planning reasons to object to the application as per the report, subject to the recommended conditions, which includes in particular the need to confirm that the management of the sewerage and the electricity supply to the site would still be adequate for the increased use. There are also conditions recommending the controls, the provision of waste and recycling facilities on site, and also controlling the keeping of dogs and other animals. So in summary, the Orchard Place Traveller site has been established since 2011, and this proposal helps meet an identified need for traveller pitches in the borough, which is shown in our local plan. It's considered that it's desirable to provide additional pitches on an existing established traveller site rather than extend an existing one or find a new site, and the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, Simon. Okay, we don't have any members of the public speaking for or against, but we do have Councillor Sunnox with us. So if he'd like to step forward, and speak on the item. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Sunnock, and the bell will go after 4. You know the rules.
I won't need 5 minutes. I won't need 5 minutes. Yes, look, I fully understand the need to find adequate provision for travellers. But I have been emphatically asked to call this in by the parish council, and I hadn't realised that their call-in had not been registered an objection. I think they do object. Okay, so that's a point on the report that we need to raise. And the second point on the report is that it says there are no current enforcement issues on the site. And it's just well known that there's a paving business, Essex and Suffolk Paving, I think, operating from the site in contravention of the previous application. And I think the concerns from the village, there's a couple of objections from neighbours, and I've taken soundings with other people. I think the concerns there are that the planning conditions won't be adhered to, that it's a very narrow lane, and I think there's a unease in the village about it. And I think that's all I really need to say. It's up to the committee, as ever they have difficult decisions to make.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Simon, there was just a little point there, if you wanted to pick that up, please.
Yes, certainly, thank you. So, whilst we didn't receive a formal objection, I think I tried to reflect in the report that the parish council asked local ward members to call it in. So I think it's clear that they were objecting to it, but I didn't receive a formal objection from them. And I checked with the planning enforcement manager whether there were any outstanding enforcement issues as part of my assessment of the proposal, and they confirmed that there was no live enforcement issues that they were dealing with. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I will open this up to the committee. Councillor Lismore first, please.
Sorry, yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, you still haven't heard back from the fire service? Because they were concerned, or they have not answered the question about how close the caravans are to each other.
Sorry, yes, just to confirm, we did hear back from them, and they've confirmed they have no objections.
Excellent. Councillor Tate.
It wasn't necessarily the fire service, but they just look really. I'm trying to work out how we're going to get 3 caravans in that bit there. They'll be exceptionally cramped, I should imagine, particularly the one towards the back that faces the one that's at the back. Yeah, that's my query. Also, if there is a query about the parish council intending to have sent something that hasn't been received, yeah, I'm of the opinion that perhaps we should wait and see what they actually had to say. So I don't want to go straight to a recommendation, but I think perhaps we should defer it while we. Otherwise, you know, if we know that there was meant to be one and something's happened, I would feel unkind just pushing that aside. But
Simon, just one moment. Councillor Sunnock, sorry, I wouldn't usually call you back in, but just very quick if you could.
Just trying to be helpful, I have actually the email that the parish council sent to me, which says exactly what their objection is, if you'd like me to read it out.
Simon, did you want to just come back on what Councillor Tate had said? And I'm just going to confer with about the statement that was submitted to Councillor Sunnock.
Okay, I mean, I don't think I received that email, but in terms of the layout and the density of the site, I mean, I've spoken to the traveller unit at the county, and they said if it was a public site, they might have some concerns about it in terms of neighbouring amenity, because if you've got maybe families that didn't know each other so well, may not want to be so close. But he said because it's a private site and these are all family members, it's a layout that they've put forward to us, so we assume that they're happy with it, and there are no guidelines or standards or stipulations about how caravans should be laid out on traveller sites, so we've got no reason. You can't see it from elsewhere. You know, it doesn't look like a cramped form of development because you can't see it from any public vantage point. So our consideration was we don't have any reasons to refuse the application on that basis.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the statement that you received, I'm not comfortable with bringing that to the committee at this moment in time because we've already had an agenda pack and a briefing, so that'd be new evidence, if you like, or new submission. If the committee are minded, Because there is that statement that obviously hasn't gone onto this agenda sheet, that may inflict your, or it may make your decision different this evening, so that's entirely up to you. But yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable bringing that to the table now. I don't know if there's any further speakers on this particular item. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to, for Simon, the case officer, to confirm, in terms of the level of public anxiety, the number of objections we've received, please, Simon.
Yes, we received 2 objections, as outlined in the report. Yeah.
And that doesn't include the one from the parish council that we haven't received, but you've built in as part of the call-in, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you. Colleagues? Okay, I will look to take proposals now, so Councillor Tate, you...
I propose that we defer it so that we can see sight of the, I just think it would be remiss of us to disregard parish council's concerns when we know they have some.
Okay, and you mentioned something about a site there. Was that to visit, did you say?
No, I was concerned about the density, but Simon has explained about that.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, thank you. That's so there's a proposal for deferral. Would anyone wish to second that? Councillor Lissamore. Okay. Yep, go for it, Robert.
So there is a third option, if I may put forward. So there is a balance here in terms of the information. So we could take, we need to get clarification. Well, the third option is we can see clarification from Simon with regards to whether anything was received. We can check the email submitted and get officers to give a view on it, provided that the committee could see sight of it as well prior to making a decision, so that we don't have to go down the deferral route. If that would be acceptable to members, so we would need to take a break to get a copy for every member to have sight of it prior to anything. So we wouldn't. It's up to members really what they want to do, or Chair, it's your discretion.
Yeah. I mean that sounds logical to me, but it's up to the members as a whole. I mean, if there is an email there, we can see that this evening because we've been submitted in time, and then we can hopefully make a decision on that.
I'm
happy to take a break. So we're going to move the break that we would have had at 4:30 forward. We'll take 15 if that's okay, because I'd like a cigarette.
Members are reminded not to discuss the application during the break with other councillors or any other members. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody. Oh. Right, excellent. So we've got that in front of us now. I'm just going to pass over to Simon, because I think he's got a few things he wants to address, and then we'll come back to the committee. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So everyone's seen the email which was sent from the Parish Council to Councillor Sunnox asking him to call the application in. So I haven't, that's why it's not included as an objection, because it's a private email from the Parish Council to Councillor Sunnox. So I can go through the bullet points if you like, just to kind of respond to the issues that are raised. So in terms of the conditions on the last application, so application 111335 gave permission for the site to be established originally. There are a number of conditions attached to that permission, which I have been through, and I've carried some of the conditions through onto this report, onto this application, as you can see in my report. In terms of whether they've been adhered to or not, as I say, I can only confirm that the Planning Enforcement Manager confirmed there's no outstanding enforcement issues, so if there are any, then they should be raised with our enforcement team if there are any concerns. In terms of overdevelopment, we've talked about layout and density, we've covered that. We've talked about the highways, the fact that 3 additional caravans, in our view, is very unlikely to cause significant harm to the local highway network, and the Highway Authority agree with that. In terms of being suitable access to local facilities, I think that was a more of a key consideration when the site was first established back in 2011. So that hasn't been a kind of a concern with this particular application. There's no reasons to think that that is a concern in the local area. Now, in terms of the numbers on the plan, it took me a little while to get my head around this, but if I can try and share my screen and I can show you the drawings that are being referred to. So bear with me a second. So I'll just go back to my presentation and find the right plan. So this is the existing site plan. I don't know if you can see that, but the email from the Parish Council talks about this number the number 54463 and 54664. Now that's the number that's just on the southern boundary here, which is a measurement of the site. So it looks like someone's thought that this is trying to extend the site, but the site is the grey shaded area, and the number below it, 54463, and the number to the left, 21869, which is also referred to in the email, are the measurements of the site. I don't think they're not lines that are expanding the site at all. That's our understanding. Obviously, I've only just seen this, so that's my understanding of what those numbers are representing and how they might have been misconstrued. Neighbouring properties, I remember this came up as an issue when this application was first being assessed, and I did check that all the neighbouring properties were notified, and I responded to Helen Cook in that regard. I can remember that. Being granted, confirm that all conditions put on the site are adhered to. Yeah, so that's a general concern about conditions being adhered to. So we can only address that when we're notified of any concerns. So I don't think I can address that this evening. Is that okay?
That's brilliant, thank you. That's really helpful. I'm grateful. That certainly helped me in making a decision this evening. Obviously, we do have the proposal on the table from Councillor Tate. I was wondering, Councillor Tate, after now seeing this, if you'd be looking to withdraw that. Withdraw the deferral, fantastic. Okay, so with all that in mind, does anybody else have anything they wish to say? Councillor Lismore.
Sorry, just a little quick. It says the conditions, non-standard dogs condition reason, no commercial breeding of dogs take place at any time. The number of dogs to be kept on site should be limited to 3. Is that 3 for the whole site or 3 for the additional caravans?
Sorry, so it will be for plot 3. So the application site, Simon, the application site is the red line, isn't it? So it would be for the whole site.
Simon?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it does seem to me that that's rather draconian and unreasonable, given people's human rights to have pets. I would have thought that, given that we are increasing the number of caravans on site, that a proportionate increase would now seem reasonable. Members may wish to consider what level they think would be appropriate to set that at.
Sorry. Councillor Lissamore.
Thank you. In my other job, as a county councillor, I used to be the cabinet member in charge of travellers, and so I've visited many of these sites, and they can be prone to dog breeding and to many, many dogs. So my concern was that it was 3 and 3 on the site. So I would not want to see that increased at all, because I know I have seen sites where they've had breeding cages and where they've had numerous, and I'm talking, 20, 30 dogs on site. So I would not want to see that increased anymore. That was my point.
Simon Grady and Simon Kent, I can see you both kind of leaning in there. Who wishes to go first? Simon Kent, because you were on that.
Thank you. I mean, I totally defer to Councillor Lissamore's expertise in this matter, and I'm sure none of us would wish to see caged or commercial breeding of dogs on the site, but maybe 3, given that we've got 3 more vans, could we have another 3 in total, 6 dogs for the whole site? Councillor Lissamore sees that as being a bit of a point, clearly. I will bend to her greater knowledge in this area, and we can leave it at that, and they could always apply to vary that condition. I think it's more important that the principle is really considered this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Simon Grady, did you wish to come in? No, you're happy with that. Are you happy with that, Councillor Lissamore? Yeah. Councillor Jackie McLean.
Could you tell me how big the site is, and is there a limit to how many caravans can go on that plot, or would they stack them in?
Simon?
I don't know. I just would like to know what size plot and what is going to be the limit to, for everyone's sake.
Thank you. There are no conditions that restrict future expansion of the site. In terms of size, do you mean as in the square meterage?
Yeah, I'm just on how many caravans could physically be on that site. That's what I was trying to ask. Or would there be more permissions coming forward? I don't know where it would stop them. I just want to know the limit.
Just want to know the limit, that was all.
Well, there is no limit on this permission, so that we could get future applications for more caravans as things stand.
So could you tell me how large the site is, please? How many acres is it?
I'm not sure I have that information.
Okay, if we don't have that information to hand, I don't know how you feel about that. I'll move on very briefly, and if you wish to come back. Councillor Tate.
Yeah, it's a sort of continuation of that, really. So I said previously that I thought the ones down the bottom looked like it was really going to be crammed in. I think my concern isn't actually with these 3, it's how would we then prevent in another year 2 more, and we can't say they're overcrowded because we're quite happy to have them crammed in. And then I know what you're saying about they're like family members and they don't mind living near each other, but do we have the ability to say no more than X, or do we not, basically?
Thank you, Councillor Tate. Simon Cairns, I believe you may have an answer for us.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, the application form states the site area is 1652.70 square metres, so 1,652.7 metres, and the application is to provide an additional 3 static caravans on the existing 2 caravan gypsy traveller site. So we could condition a maximum of 5 caravans on the site, and we know the site area, so we can add a condition to that consent to say no more than 5 caravans at any one time.
Yeah, sounds a bit better. Excellent, thank you. Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Lismore.
Apologies, it just came to mind about touring caravans. One of the pictures that you showed already had a touring caravan there. Are we restricting any touring caravans being on site?
There's nods. Simon Gans.
Thank you, Councillor Lismore. Yes, we're restricting the total number of caravans to a maximum of 5, and that's all caravans, all shapes and forms, at any one time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's sounding a bit better, everybody. Before I now look to another proposer, is there anybody else that wishes to say anything? Okay. Okay, I'll be seeking a proposer for approval of this application. Would anyone like to propose? Councillor Rippengale, seconder. Councillor Small. Oops. With that in mind, all those in favour?
That is unanimous, Chair.
Fantastic, thank you very much indeed. Okay, we got there. Councillor Sunnox, thanks for visiting. We'll now move on to item 7.3, obviously we took on block earlier, so we'll go straight to 7.4, the last item of tonight, which is 241508 Merry Hill, Colchester Road, Chapel. And I'll invite Daniel Bird to present. No, we've taken that one. It's your turn, old chap. Go for it.
Sorry about that. Miles away. Bear with me. Let me just share my screen. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This application seeks planning permission for a 2-storey rear extension which would replace some unsympathetic single-storey additions from the 1980s. The site is located to the north of Colchester Road, with the dwelling to the east known as Elm House, which is a Grade 2 listed building, with the old stables and Elm Cottage to the northeast of the site. The dwelling is located outside of the conservation area, and whilst the host dwelling is not listed, it is a non-designated heritage asset. Here is the proposed block plan and location plan showing the host dwelling in relation to the adjacent dwellings Elm House and the old stables, with details of the landscaping scheme proposed on site. Here is the existing east elevation and view of the development from the adjacent dwelling Elm House, first floor window. There are approximately 11 metres of separation distance between the two dwellings. It should be noted that the ground level of adjacent dwelling Elm House is comparatively higher than the application site. Here is the existing driveway, which shows the separation distance between the host dwelling and Elm House. As you can see, the design, scale and materiality of the 1980s additions detract heavily from the design merit of the host dwelling and are considered unsympathetic. This application aims to generate an enhancement to the site, host dwelling and setting of the adjacent listed asset. Here is the existing west elevation, again showing the 1980s additions, which are of poor design merit and visually detract from the host dwelling. Here are the existing elevations. These are the proposed elevations, which would incorporate the removal of 2 UPVC windows and the addition and a ground floor door from the east elevation. These would be replaced with timber double glazed sash windows and timber glazed side door with a stone surround. In addition, the proposed brickwork would be finished in red brick in Flemish bond with lime mortar to match the wider dwelling. These details have been secured via conditions 6, 7, 8 and 9. The quality of finishing materials proposed to the extension are of the highest standard, which reflects the design language of the host dwelling and would assimilate well to the site. This is the proposed roof plan, which would be finished in Welsh slate with cast aluminium gutters and downpipes. Finally, as the rear extension would be constructed adjacent to the neighbouring dwellings, the impact on daylight and sunlight amenity has been assessed. The applicant has provided a daylight and sunlight report dated 28th of October 2024, which illustrates that development proposed would not intersect a 25-degree line from the ground floor windows of either Elm House or the old stables. As you can see, the 25-degree line from the ground floor window exceeds quite considerably the height of the proposed extension. Therefore, the proposal complies with the relevant guidance. This report has been assessed in conjunction with on-site observations, and as outlined within the officer report, the proposal is considered to comply with the relevant adopted standards and would not be materially harmful to the amenities of neighbouring dwellings. The proposal is considered acceptable in relation to design, heritage, neighbour amenity and all other material planning considerations. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. Okay, we'll move on to the speakers now. First, we have Lena Short to speak in objection to the application. If you'd like to come forward when you're ready. You'll have 3 minutes to speak and the bell will go after 2. Thank you. I'm so sorry, I'll just have to turn your microphone on. Beg your pardon.
Okay. I live next door to the applicant property and have grave concerns with the officer's recommendation. I hope you've read my comments previously submitted, which are far more detailed than I can reiterate in the time allotted today. I've previously highlighted a number of concerns with the daylight and sunlight report, which the officer has not addressed in his report. Your agenda listed the principal policies with no mention of the BRE standards, yet the case officer relies heavily on this in terms of his assessment, re loss of amenity to my listed property. Nevertheless, the officer asserts that BRE policies are adopted guidance. However, the website provides no evidence of this, and perhaps the chairman could seek clarification on this point, as no response has been forthcoming when I've requested it on numerous occasions. In view of the weight placed on this as a material consideration, it is important. The BRE guidelines themselves state it is not mandatory and should not be seen as an instrument of planning policy. Despite its many failings, the officer report is heavily reliant on the submitted study. It purports to be a technical document, but is blatantly inaccurate and based on assumptions. For example, it lacks dimensions. It is annotated do not scale, which reduces its credibility. It is based on estate agents' details lifted from the internet, which clearly state floor plan measurements are approximate and for illustrative purposes only. No visit to my property has been undertaken to take accurate measurements. It wrongly states there are 6 windows to my kitchen when in fact there are 2. The report's inaccuracies can be seen by overlaying drawings number 6 and 7. The distance between my building and the applicant property is different in each drawing. They're moved further apart to fit their argument. The case officer claims it complies with the council's 45-degree guidance, yet provides no diagram to evidence this. It blatantly fails in the horizon plane, and no accurate dimensions are provided to ascertain whether it complies in the vertical plane. The actual impact on Elm House is considerable, being unusual in layout and totally reliant on flank windows to provide light to main rooms. The proposed 2-storey extension will reduce the amount of light to windows and represent an overbearing obstruction, with the sky only visible when viewed at very close range from ground floor windows, and views of the viaduct from the first floor windows totally lost. Although the case officer asserts the existing view is merely fortuitous, Historic England's publication, The Setting of Heritage Assets, puts great emphasis on the setting of a listed building and the importance of views both from and to it. Further, the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 208, states that where a development will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. There are no public benefits to be derived from a 2-storey extension to a private house. In view of the errors in the report, I requested members visit my property as being the only realistic way to gauge the impact. Unfortunately, the committee officer advised this was not possible, thereby placing greater reliance on the officer report. The plans include a blanked out first floor window that easily lends itself to
That
future.
is your 3 minutes, I'm afraid.
Do you mind?
If you've got a sentence or so, we can do that.
I haven't got a lot, but this is really important because there's so many things that have been missed. And I've just had to speak to Daniel.
I do appreciate that, but I can only give you the 3 minutes. It's fair. That's how we do it, blanket for everybody.
To conclude, the officer report is not balanced. It is skewed and places heavily reliance on a report paid for by the applicant, which is based on unadopted guidance, has many irregularities. This has been repeatedly pointed out to the case officer but ignored. The report is dismissive of views to and from the listed building despite historic England advice and the National Planning Policy Framework. Issues raised under third-party representations are simply ignored and rely entirely on you members having found time to read them yourselves, such as the dismissive nature of dealing with neighbouring
Right, I'm really sorry. I am going to have to ask you to conclude now. That will have to do. We're now at 4 minutes, so that is enough.
Can I just ask Daniel, have you got those pictures? I had some plans, the plans that were submitted overlaid onto photographs taken from my property. They're not in the report tonight, and I've asked Daniel if he can put them up to show
you can do that.
the impact
we will
will
do
be
that.
caused
Absolutely, we will absolutely do that. That's not a
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll invite Tom Green to speak in support of the application, please. Hi, Tom. Tom, 3 minutes, Belg after 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, everyone. Our proposals seek to replace and improve previous extensions which have been constructed poorly and with unsympathetic materials and techniques, whilst also improving the configuration of the internal layout. In doing so, we seek permission to extend on the first floor for an additional bedroom to better balance the accommodation for a dwelling of Merry Hills size. The proposed design is discrete, not extending beyond the existing footprint of the building, and replaces bulky elements that were constructed as part of previous extensions. The main objections that have been raised are with respect to the first floor addition. Firstly, it is claimed that the proposal will result in a material loss of light and cause overshadowing to the neighbouring houses. To provide assurances in this regard, we commissioned a sunlight assessment which concluded that any effect of the development on the daylight to the neighbouring houses to be unnoticeable. This is largely due to the distance of separation between the houses and height of the proposed new roof elements being lower than that of the primary building. Despite adhering to the initial 25-degree test, which itself indicates no material impact on light, further calculations were performed for the windows of Elm House to provide additional comfort following concerns raised by the owner at the initial design stage. Secondly, concern has been raised regarding a loss of view to the viaduct from neighbouring windows. The views from these windows are glimpsed, already largely obscured by the existing building, including the bulky roof additions from previous extensions, which arguably negatively impact Elm House as they currently stand. Whilst the proposed first floor extension will indeed further obscure this view, we believe the replacement of the current poorly constructed extension with the more sympathetic style and materials will more than compensate this. Our intentions are solely to enhance Merry Hill through both function and form in a sympathetic way, and believe our proposal will achieve this without undue negative impact on neighbouring properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Daniel, you have some things you'd like to show us, some images.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Bear with me. As these are the graphics that the speaker referred to initially, I did suggest I'll publicise those. As you can see, this is an image that's been obviously the drawing's been superimposed over an image to show the visibility of the structure from the first floor window in this instance. If I scroll up, and that from the ground floor, that window is slightly skew whiffed, so I'm unsure of the reason for that, but hopefully that's illustrating of the points that were raised. If I now address the points, please. Obviously, the speakers raised concerns with the daylight and sunlight reports and inaccuracies with it. It does refer to BRE guidelines within the report, which are standard within planning, and they are commonly used. It is made clear in my report as well that these are not solely relied upon. Obviously, this is something that's been provided by the applicant in which we need to assess. It's also been assessed on site and through the sections of the plans taken from the drawings themselves to fully assess them against other guidelines such as the Essex Design Guide, which similarly requires the 25-degree principles. In that instance, it's worth noting that when the 25-degree rule is not breached, usually we don't require any further details. In this instance, the applicant has gone one step further and provided technical calculations on top of that. So they have actually exceeded, it's worth making that point, that they've actually exceeded that requirement. The 45-degree test has been considered in detail, and that is also referred to in the report. That's considered via the plan. Essentially, you just draw a 45-degree angle from the extension to see if it's any impact. But as in this case, as the two dwellings are side by side, the 25-degree rule is more prominent in this scenario. In terms of the overbearing wall, it is noted that a change in outlook would occur as a result of this development. There is obviously an increase in built form, particularly at the first floor level. However, it is considered that there is no restriction that is harmful in terms of daylight provision to the rooms. I sympathise with the speaker. Obviously, her kitchen is on the side elevation of the property, in which case sunlight isn't great to the room anyway, but it does meet all of the tests relevant to the daylight provision as outlined within the report. In terms of the view of the viaduct, this view is fortuitous as referenced in the report. There is no historic link between the viaduct and the property, the listed property. Hence, there is no reason for that view to be protected. It is a private view of the neighbouring property, which is unfortunate that it would be blocked out, but in terms of planning, it's not a material planning consideration in that respect. I would refute all of the claims that any comments have been ignored. They have all been assessed in great detail, and correspondence, where possible, has been undertaken with the third party with concerns that have been raised. A site visit was also undertaken at the neighbouring property to gain a perspective, as you can see in my slide photos, and to better understand the concerns of the neighbouring resident. As part of that site visit, it was possible to visualise the impact of any of the development from the primary habitable rooms along that side elevation, and they were all assessed. And as I say, that was corroborated with the document supplied by the applicant and on-site observations, and no harm was identified in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll open it up to questions now. We've got two on the list so far. Yep, Councillor Rippingale. Thank you.
You may have partially answered mine. So is there any point where the right to a view is a material planning consideration?
Daniel. Oh, Simon Cairns.
The right to a view, or rather the importance of a view, can be relevant when, as the speaker highlighted, when the view provides interconnectivity between two heritage assets, where there is a historic association between those two buildings. So, for example, between a church and a rectory, or a manor house and a church, in the case of a hall church complex, where there is some significance that's derived from that intervisibility. In this instance, the occupier obviously enjoys the view, and I totally understand that and respect that. But in planning terms, that is just a view as any other view would be, from one property to something which the occupier finds attractive. And indeed, if that were the case, all development could potentially block some view and no development would ever take place. And that is the reason why generally the loss of view is not a material consideration. However, loss of outlook, where the outlook becomes unneighbourly, can be a material planning consideration, notwithstanding the heritage aspect. So members may wish to consider whether that development would be considered so unneighbourly as to constitute a reason for refusal. However, as you've seen from the 45-degree test, 25-degree test rather, the proposal does pass that test quite clearly. Although I appreciate that the occupier of the adjacent property would now see more form than exists at present. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good. Councillor Lismore.
Thank you. That leads sort of quite nicely into this. One thing that really concerns me about this application is the weight that's put on the application, saying how awful the existing extension is and how much better we can do now with this new extension. And I totally agree with that. You know, the extension that's existing at the moment is not pleasing to my eye, I will certainly say. However, what I'm concerned about is, oh, and by the way, it's going to add an extra bedroom. Now, if the extension, the new extension that was being built, was offering the same facilities as the extension that is there already, but it's just going to enhance the look of it and make it look, you know, far better than what it does now, then I wouldn't necessarily have a problem. But I almost feel as if this application is cloaked in a, you know, this is going to look so much better, but we're also going to get an extra bedroom. So I'm very, very concerned about that. And I really want to thank the resident for sending in the superimposed pictures, because I think it really hammers home to us what that is actually going to mean. So you just mentioned about this unneighbourly condition. You know, do we feel that that is enough to refuse this application? Because I have grave concerns over the design of it.
Daniel?
Yes, in terms of design, there's been back and forth between the applicant and the council in terms of revising the scheme. In terms of the fact that the adjacent dwelling is listed, obviously there's a greater need for the quality of the built form, which has been reflected in the proposed plans. Agree. In terms of the report, it does mention a lot about the poor nature of the existing form on site, but I think there is a real opportunity here to obviously enhance that visually, so it is worth mentioning. In terms of them providing provision for an additional bedroom, obviously that is at the applicant's discretion. The current layout of the site, when you walk internally within the dwelling, is a bit like a rabbit warren, effectively. It's sprawling at the back. It kind of doesn't really make sense for modern living particularly, so you can understand the reasoning for obviously the applicant's reasoning for the additional bedroom. Also, in terms of the siting of the bedroom, it reduces the scale of the bulk of development at the back of the house. So the original house is appreciated more than it would be currently because of the amount of rubbish effectively currently at the back. It would actually just console it to the left side when facing the back of the property rather than sprawling across the edge. So, and in terms of outlook on the window, it is accepted that there would be a reduction in outlook, but the kitchen along the side, which is most prominently impacted, is a shallow room, and you already have to kind of get to the window to get much light anyway. So yeah, and as I say, it's met all of the relevant tests that we've, as I've discussed already, in terms of daylight.
Thank you, Daniel. Councillor Lismore, anything else? Just mulling it over.
I mean, just so then to confirm, you do not believe that there is enough there to refuse it on this neighbourlyhood? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's our officer's opinion that it's not, there's not sufficient harm to justify a refusal on that basis.
Simon, I wonder if you can just add on that perhaps to help the committee.
Yes, thank you. I think Councillor Lismore identifies a very important point. And that is not really about what's there at the moment particularly. It is about the design, the appropriateness of the design of what's being proposed. And I would reassure you that I think an awful lot of time has gone into that design. And whilst the photoshopped image is not at all, maybe deliberately so, almost inevitably flattering, I think the reality of that would be much more sympathetic in the flesh than is implied by the image that you've been provided with, which is a very dark, it's rendered in very dark colours, and it does look pretty awful in that image. But I think one should look at the actual drawings and the materials that are proposed, which are all high quality. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else wish to speak at all? Okay. So the recommended decision is one of approval. I will be looking for a proposer of some form now, please. Councillor McSpindler, seconder. Councillor Smalls. That's for approval, folks. Yeah. Yeah. All those in favour?
It is unanimous, Chair.
It's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for coming, guys. Appreciate it. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I think that concludes the meeting, everybody. Bang on 8 o'clock. Look at that. Thanks ever so much, everyone.
Recording start.